Welcome to another X Space hosted by Democrats for an Informed Approach to Gender. I'm Ellie, DIAG's Executive Director. DIAG is a 501c3 organization. Our mission is to shed light on the harms of gender ideology, the medical scandal of so-called gender-affirming care, and the erosion of women's rights. To find out more about us, go to our website at diag.org. That's diag, di-ag.org. And while you're there, visit our merch store. Also, tomorrow is Giving Tuesday. Please consider donating to DIAG to further our work, educating the general public, including our nationwide public messaging campaign, which is in development. Our host, Lisa Simeone, is indisposed today, but we didn't want to miss the opportunity to talk to our guest. He's writer Ben Appel, the author of a new memoir called Cis White Gay, The Making of a Gender Heretic. His life's trajectory has given him special insight into how gender madness has taken hold on our society. Welcome, Ben Appel.
Thanks for having me.
First, congratulations on your book. We've had so many dramatic twists and turns. You've had so many dramatic twists and turns in your young life. The memoir makes for a riveting read, very hard to put down. Highly recommend it.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start by asking about your title, Cis White Gay. And I imagine some of our viewers might take issue with the use of cis, which is a label concocted by trans ideologues to promote the idea that all people have a magic gender identity. So there are people who claim to be trans, and then the rest of us who accept our biological reality. Why don't you explain the title for us?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I can definitely understand the sensitivity about that, and I am sensitive about it as well. And I'm using it in a kind of sardonic or ironic way. It's just that's this cis white gay. Oh, you're such a cis white gay. It's kind of like a pejorative that I've heard flung at me and other gay men for, I don't know, maybe 7, 8 years now. And so I knew that if and when I wrote a book about this, I wanted to kind of claim that and, and title it to kind of throw it back in those ideologues' faces, I guess, just in a playful way. But yeah, I can understand people's sensitivity. It's also proven kind of difficult because on this website, Elon Musk censors that word.
Yep.
So, when you're promoting a book, it can be tricky if you have a censored word in the title.
Yeah,
Weird times we're in.
yeah, we got a warning about it when we were posting.
My God.
But so far we haven't been canceled for it. Um, so let's start at the beginning of your story. So you grew up in a religious community called the Lamb of God, and some have referred to it as a cult. I don't know if you refer to it as a cult. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for a long time, I would joke and kind of say cult in a sarcastic way, but it was that. I mean, it was investigated in the 90s, and there was an expose in Baltimore Magazine titled "The Cult Next Door," and yeah, it was your kind of classic cult leaders at the top, groupthink, purity policing, all of that stuff. We didn't live on a commune though. We just all lived in the same area in what they called the cluster. It was a neighborhood. So there were other people that lived in the same area, but it was a lot of community people. So like every other house or every third house were community members.
And there was a leader, and they, met all the usual descriptions of.
Yeah.
And it's a strong word. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is a strong word, and I think it's like a lot of different words now. It can be flung around. People use it casually, like they use other words. If we're talking about, like, I talk about OCD in my book, and when I talk about having OCD and having a disorder called scrupulosity and that developing when I was 12 or 13, people might think, oh yeah, I have OCD too because I like, my closet neat, and I make sure that I make my bed every day. And there's a big difference between the disorder of obsessive compulsive disorder and just kind of being anal and picky or clean. So with cult, a lot of people will fling that around, but it really was that. And I think a big part of moving past the ideology that I encountered there was to acknowledge it for what it actually was.
And this was outside of Baltimore, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And from a young age, you did not conform to sex stereotypes. You'd be considered gender non-conforming, I guess now. What was the reaction of your community when it became apparent that you were a young gay man?
Well, I didn't really realize, and I didn't know that all of the lessons about the evils of homosexuality were relevant to me. I was young, and I was not, I hadn't gone through adolescence. Um, again, yeah, my sex role, nonconformity, gender nonconformity, whatever you want to call it, was very evident from a really early age. And they caught on. And so, but the way that they responded, my elders, was they, foresaw what was coming. Oh, this kid is, a very girly kid. And what does that mean? It means that he will likely grow up to be a homosexual. So let's prime him for that outcome. Get him to understand how evil and terrible that is, so that when the time comes, which it surely or likely will, he will know that he has to take steps to prevent it or change it or repent for it or claim a life of celibacy or whatever it was. So I just got lessons about the evils of homosexuality from a really, really early age. And in retrospect, now I kind of just think about all these times when I was kind of pulled aside or taught these lessons. Like I kind of opened the first chapter of my book, um, talking about one of them, and in retrospect, I think like I don't know if that was just a coincidence. We weren't just shooting the shit. Like they were pulling me aside to kind of really, because they were directing this specifically at me. But it wasn't like in that community my peers were like, "Oh, you're such a girl," or they were calling me the F word or anything like that, because we were such a small tight knit cult community. There were 100 kids in the school that I attended, from kindergarten to 8th grade. There were 4 kids in my grade, and we all lived in the same area. We were all raised together since infancy. We were like just one big extended family. So there wasn't an in crowd. There wasn't a clique of jocks and cool kids or anything like that. We were just all like part of God's army, on fire for the Lord. And if you were a good little Christian, then that was really all that mattered. You were actually an outsider if you were rebellious or if you were a sinner, I guess, in any way. And in that context, I wasn't a sinner yet because I was just a young kid. And I mean, I'm sure my classmates knew or picked up on how different I was, but nobody really made a big deal. That didn't come until later.
So you weren't getting like you said, you weren't being pulled aside saying, now, Ben, we want you to stop being so girly. It was just more subtle messaging that you were picking up,
It was messaging specifically about homosexuality.
right?
So,
But
like, in Bible class, sodomy was a vocabulary word in my Bible class. You know, uh, that kind of stuff. It was gays are evil. They're pedophiles. They all get sick and die of AIDS and burn in hell. That was from the age of 9 or so. And then, uh, but in terms of gender nonconformity, no, not necessarily.
and were there other kids? I mean, did you notice other kids who,
There were
you
there
know,
actually there was a girl, one of my best friends, who was in the same grade as me, who I grew up with. She was a very masculine girl, and grew up to be a lesbian. She's now married to her wife, and I mean, she played on the boys' baseball team. She Yeah, she was your typical very, very butch, young girl.
And
Um,
did the 2 of you was it kind of was there any kind of connection, or did you just both, you know, wanting to be so far away that you ignored it all?
so I think this is where like adolescence and like sexual development and maturity really comes into play. Like that's really relevant to this because before one goes through adolescence, it really is just about whether you want to call it sex role performance or gender performance, gender expression. It doesn't have to do with sexuality, at least in my case. I mean, that's just how I understand it to be. And it really wasn't in my case. So we left the community when I was 12. And so I was just beginning to realize that I was this thing as we were being kind of pushed out of that community, and then all of the ties that I had with those friends were erased. I mean, I didn't see them anymore. So, and then I was bullied in my new public school. So they picked up on it right away. So it was kind of like this big confluence of all of those things coming together at once: sexual maturity, and then kind of realizing, oh yeah, I don't at first it's a realization like, oh, I'm not responding to girls or that picture of that girl in that swimsuit in the way that all the other boys around me are. And then kind of realizing, oh, this is why, because I'm responding to that instead. You realize, in my experience, I realized what I didn't like before I realized, oh, this is why, because I like boys.
And how did your parents and family deal with that?
I think my dad was a little distant. He vibed more with my younger brother because my younger brother was like your classic boy type. But he didn't he my dad was kind of distant from all of us, so I don't think it was really because of that specifically. My mom talks now about how she knew from when I was like 3, that I would probably grow up to be gay, and she really didn't think so much about it. She just thought, oh, maybe perhaps that'll be his burden to carry when he gets older. But it wasn't. I wasn't really discouraged so much. I don't know how to describe. It was like we were. It was so much about being pure and perfect and on fire for Jesus, and proselytizing and evangelizing, and we would pray over each other and speak in tongues, and it was about that. It wasn't. It was everything else was kind of irrelevant to this larger kind of holy war, this battle that we were all a part of every day.
Oh, sounds very invigorating to have such a big cause for such a young kid.
Right, right.
And so you write obsessively trying to pray away the gay, and you use this term scrupulosity, which you mentioned before. So can you go through what does that term mean?
Yeah, so there's different types of obsessive compulsive disorder, and scrupulosity is one of those types of OCD. A lot of people, when they think about OCD, they think about compulsive hand washing, or like light flipping or counting or something like that. With scrupulosity, with people that have that specific type of disorder, I am consumed with my morality. I'm obsessed with um constantly self-scanning for signs of immorality. So, and then compulsively praying. The compulsions are prayer, rituals like signing of the cross, feeling like you need to kneel down 7 times, 8 times, 9 times, 10 times before the crucifix above your bed, attending confession over and over and over again, constantly repenting for whatever. And we're all imperfect, so it's this constant thing. Oh my gosh, I just had a negative thought about that person's haircut, or oh, I didn't hold the door for that lady, or oh my gosh, I just remembered I forgot to, that kind of thing. And launching into prayer, and it, like a lot of or I guess maybe all, but like OCD and for people that have that disorder, it's about control. And it's about, it can be a trauma response. For me, it was a trauma response. I just developed that at a really traumatic time, that disorder. It was a way to cope, to be honest. But I felt so out of control, and all of these things were going on. And so I thought, oh, if I pray enough, if I repent enough, God will see to it that that he'll spare me. Like, he won't be happy with me. He won't. Everything won't be okay, but he'll just for one more day kind of spare uh, things getting even worse than they are.
Sounds exhausting.
Totally exhausting. Yeah, I mean, I think anybody, any kind of obsessive compulsive disorder, it is. It's totally. It's time consuming. It's embarrassing. It's very embarrassing. You know, uh, being in high school and as it got worse and worse, and now, because I can't just say them in my head, because the prayers in my head, because they're all jumbled, they don't sound like words anymore. Now I have to say them out loud, but then how can I say my prayers out loud in algebra if whatever? Well, I have to kind of disguise it by pretending like I'm coughing, or and say the word amen in a cough, or so, just all of this exhaustive stuff. Looking back, I'm like, I'm sure that I wasn't able to successfully disguise all of that. Like, and I wonder now what my classmates ever thought, but nobody ever said, um, "Oh yeah, I remember you." Nobody ever did that, or like, "Oh gosh, you were," except for my family. My family remembered because I would be sitting at the dinner table, and suddenly I would like start blowing kisses at the Bible, like in the that was on the shelf in the corner of our living room, and they would be like, "What the fuck are you doing?" you know. But that was it. Nobody outside of my family ever remarked on it.
Yeah, I'm guessing the amen cough was not t
Yeah.
not successful.
Right? I thought I was so clever, but now looking back, I'm like, I was just a kid sitting there probably just doing the sign of the cross and saying amen over and over again, like a nutso.
Wow. Okay. So you saw another version of scrupulosity when you enrolled in Columbia, when you were 31 years old. This is a big jump. But so we'll come back to some other parts of your life. But when you tell us what you found at Columbia around scrupulosity.
Yeah, so I thought that I had kind of like gotten a grip on the disorder. I was actually 33 when I started at Columbia, and I thought I had gotten a grip on the disorder. Like, I had, got so I had struggled with drugs and alcohol. That was the way that I initially coped with it. And then I got sober in my early 20s. So I had been sober for, from 23, and then I'm 33 going into Columbia. And so I had done years of therapy and just a lot of personal growth. And it wasn't so I was taking I had taken medication for it, not like narcotic, but your typical like SSRIs or whatever, because those work well for treating OCD symptoms. And so I had done a lot of work, and so it was still there, and it was still present, but it was much more manageable, and it wasn't debilitating. It wasn't running my life, and it wasn't exhausting or anything. And then what I found is when I went to Columbia, it just it was unreal how it like just reactivated my response to being in this culture where I was suddenly constantly terrified of misspeaking or saying the wrong thing, or misgendering, or being called out. And when I started to get called out in class for what people interpreted as me misspeaking when I wasn't, um, which that might sound confusing, but it was like I kind of started to realize that people were just not really listening to what I was saying because I was, this quote unquote cis white male. They were expecting specific talking points to come out of my mouth, and they were everything was kind of given this bad faith reading of everything that I would say, whether it be like a lecture during a seminar or a class or whatever, just class discussion. And so I started to, and just these really subtle ways, they weren't big deals, but they were just these like, oh, like this kind of just subtle ways to shame or to condescend or to say, oh, that's morally wrong or an incorrect way of looking at this. And I became very afraid because I started to see it wasn't just me, like there was so much pressure um, for people to abide by a specific, very dogmatic narrative about everything, like everything regarding social justice, regarding inequality, inequity, uh, you know gender, race, the Israel Palestine conflict, like everything that was present. It was very similar to like being in that community, I guess, is what I found. But after months in that atmosphere, um, that disorder came just surging and to the surface, and it really became a huge issue. And I kind of thought I knew what was happening, and so I knew that I needed to address it and get help for it. And being someone that's sober and had been sober, like I can't drink, I can't use drugs, I can't anesthetize. Like I have to just kind of face this stuff. So I'm like, all right, well, what am I going to do here? But I also started to see that maybe this isn't so uncommon. I mean, I don't think everybody necessarily has this disorder specifically, because I do think there's kind of a line there. But I saw how these things were present in other people. I saw kind of the worried looks on the other students' faces, and the way that they responded when they were called out for, quote unquote, misspeaking about something, or professing, the quote unquote wrong view about something. I realized that everyone was under such a huge pressure, and yeah, that these symptoms were kind of, I saw them around me, but they were especially became really bad with me.
Um, you know, you have a quote in your book that I love. It says, falsely advertised as a place of free inquiry where adults could interrogate established narratives and confront uncomfortable truths, the academy has become a religious commune, a place where emotionally stunted, sanctimonious assholes who had never had an original thought in their lives made names for themselves by reciting scriptures while policing the thoughts of others. It was a funhouse mirror image of the religious cult I grew up in. So, can you expand on that? How was Columbia like the Lamb of God?
Yeah, so it was really about that group think and purity policing. I think purity policing is really what it was. Like how I grew up in that religious cult that I grew up in, there was this constant kind of competition to be more morally pure than your neighbor. So the women, for example, the female leaders were called handmaids, believe it or not, but they were called handmaids. The leaders were handmaids, and the male leaders were called coordinators. And so, like the handmaids would kind of compete with even like how inexpensive their clothes were. So, the more meek and more, like, one would say, "Oh, that's a great," everybody, they all wore long dresses, so it was like, "That's a great dress," and, "Oh, I got it at Ambets for $1.50. Oh, well, I was, at a yard sale and I, got mine for 50 cents." And then someone says, "Oh, well, I made my outfit and I make my family's clothes." So it was just this, and if you did err and if you did sin, it wasn't about, oh, we're human or imperfect. It was like it was shame. It was Everything was so consequential. The stakes were just constantly so high. So if you did something wrong, you were just really shamed, and you were taught to feel just shame, just so much shame. I mean, for the in prayer groups and in prayer meetings, and that were often, or there were prayer meetings that were where everybody attended, and then there were sex segregated prayer groups throughout the week. And so it would be, you would kind of just like confess uh, to leaders or to higher ups, uh, whatever impurities were in your mind or in your heart, um, and and it would be this thing like, well, oh yeah, you need to work on that, and you need to, get right with the Lord, and you're making yourself vulnerable to the devil, and that kind of stuff. So the way that I saw those similarities was I just saw how there was this this is actually it was this utter denial it was the most bizarre freaking thing to see all of these people around me pretending as if they had never had a bad thought or a negative thought or anything in their entire lives, like, and everything was sifted through a moral lens. We would read there would be a reading in class, and we wouldn't be talking about, I don't know, the content. We would be talking about how horrible of a person this writer was because they, you know, were a colonizer, or I don't know whatever they had done or had perhaps had admitted to, or in whatever way they were, if they were, anything besides indigenous and trans, then they were, vulnerable or subject to that kind of dressing down. And I just kind of would sit there and look around me and be like, I'm like in like a church youth group. Like this is nuts to see all of these people competing to be the most, morally pure, when it came to what the dogma was in at the university. It was different, obviously, than the Lamb of God, where it was about, specifically Christianity and um, Christian fundamentalism. Here, it was about social justice fundamentalism. It was about very, very specific views about race, gender, and how to achieve and fight for equality the proper way, and the good and the righteous way, and the moral way to do that.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, the Lamb of God seems a little easier because at least there's a chance of redemption. I mean, you can pray about this, you can confess. I mean, Colombia, you're just thrown to the wolves, and once you make that mistake, I mean,
Hun-
really.
100%, 100%. You're so right. I think I write that somewhere in my book. It's like, you know, with that, yes, at least there's this chance for redemption. In this world, it's you are doing the work. You're quote doing the work for the rest of your life. You'll never achieve, if you're white, if you're this, you will always be racist. You will never not be racist. But you have to do the work for the rest of your life. Towards what? I don't know, just towards your deathbed. And you'll never get there. You'll never be able to properly atone for the sins of the past. You'll never really quite get there. So what your job is to do the work. There's no salvation. There's no mercy or grace.
Oh, and so, you write about some other students that you had these little interactions with who clearly felt the same way you did. But, did anybody else speak up? Did anybody else, make it known that they were also, um, a failure like you were?
Well, I want to say that I wasn't. I would love to say that I was like so brave, and I just was constantly, saying, "Oh," like in class. I mean, I was petrified. I was terrified. I know that I did speak and voice things, but trepidatiously, and I know that I couched things, that I glossed over, that I'm, because I was afraid of what the consequences were of misspeaking or doing something wrong. I mean, it was kind of nuts, but I was like, I was terrified. I had worked so hard to get this opportunity to go to this Ivy League school. Like, it was something beyond my wildest dreams, and I had worked my butt off to get there in my 30s. And so I'm like, I'm scared that I'm gonna get kicked. Like, I was paranoid I was gonna get kicked out or like be shamed. I don't know. Just I was gonna misspeak, and suddenly something was gonna go viral, and someone was gonna get me on recorded saying I have no idea, and it was gonna, and I was gonna be ostracized and exiled. I mean, essentially, kind of just excommunicated. That was my fear of being excommunicated from this new cult that I found myself in. But Yeah, that was what it was. So I wasn't necessarily speaking up while everyone else around me was being quiet, but I guess I was, as the year I was there for 3.5 years before I graduated, and I think like maybe at the end of my second year or into my third year, I started becoming a little bit more gutsy, especially with the things that I was writing. Like in my writing, when I was taking a lot of writing classes because I'm a writer, and so I was taking journalism classes and so on, and I was challenging or attempting to challenge the orthodoxy there in subtle and kind of like very sanitized ways. But yeah, it was very much behind the scenes. There were people that would talk to me privately. And if I would happen to say something like, yeah, I've been struggling with this, just kind of in an honest and vulnerable way, I could see this kind of relief flood into their, like, they would just be like, oh my God, that's been my experience. And it was a relief for me, it was a relief for them. But yeah, there weren't very many people that were speaking up to challenge. I mean, if they were kind of like maybe just known as like the right wing kid, the conservative kid, but they were hardly there. I mean, in the humanities classrooms that I was in and spending so much time in, I didn't encounter that. So no, the short answer is no. That was a long winded response.
Yeah, that's must be incredibly isolating experience to be kind of having to keep these thoughts private. And we see it in this movement. People who contact Diag who
Mm,
they can't talk to anybody, right? Because all their friends uh, would leave them and dismiss them and brand them as a right wing crazy bigot. So it's we hear this. It's really sad how isolating this ideology is for people.
yes.
Um, so you say that your experience at Columbia brought to mind China's Cultural Revolution, and you were particularly influenced by An Chi Min's novel Becoming Madame Mao.
Hmm.
Um, can you talk about that a little bit? Like, do you really think a cultural revolution is underway at places like Columbia?
I do. Well, yeah, Becoming Madame Mao is her fictional account, like it's historical fiction, but she also wrote a brilliant memoir called Red Azalea, which is amazing. And she's written other memoirs as well, but it's about her time in a worker camp during the Cultural Revolution. And so, yeah, I compare it to that. I mean, it's very, very, it's different. The difference is that it's long, it's like kind of like decades underway. It's more it's slower and more insidious. I mean, during the Cultural Revolution, you have this leader who's in this communist regime that's demanding, I mean, that has literal red guards. Like there are red guards now. I mean, these people, these kids, these students function as if they were and are red guards. We see this. I mean, we see, for example, let me think. Okay, we've all seen videos of Riley Gaines visiting universities and being chased down the hallway and screamed at and cornered by these students who are screaming at her because she's saying, I don't want males to participate in sports with women, and I don't think that's fair. And they're kind of like like a total mob. I mean, we see this stuff, and this is what the Red Guard does and is. They shame and they threaten and they create this culture and this atmosphere of total fear. Now, again, during the Cultural Revolution in China, people were actually beaten and they were actually killed. And this was a very dramatic undertaking that took place in a short period of time, that was from the top down. Like right now, it would be like as if, under the Biden administration or under the Trump administration, they were specifically like, okay, now we're going to form these guards and these bands of individuals to go around. But in some ways, it's kind of like that. I mean, you have these biased response teams, you have these DEI, you have people kind of policing what other people are saying and doing and how they're speaking about things and creating a culture and an atmosphere of fear. And why it is really similar, and what I found is that what we're seeing and what has been playing out for decades now in the academy is really a culmination of that kind of, I guess, pseudo cultural revolution that began in the States back at the same time that the Cultural Revolution was taking place in China. Like, it's the late 60s, early 70s, and 68. I mean, these activists, these socialist and communist activists that were activating in the West at that time found that their methods for affecting change weren't necessarily totally working when they were just rioting and protesting, and they said we need to enter into the institutions and change things from the inside out culturally. Like, we need to make a cultural change within the West from the inside out, so we need to get control of these institutions. So rather than just rebelling and fighting and rioting and burning it down, we need to become the professors, we need to become the leaders, we need to get in there, the administrators, and we need to engineer society to be, and culture to be how we want it to be. And they used the language of Mao. The long march through the institutions is what they called it, and that's an allusion to Mao's long march, his famous long march of leading, apparently, all of these thousands of Chinese communists through a vast, wilderness, and through a mountain, and many people died. But it was this kind of legendary myth about, part of his lore. So that is what that is based upon. And now, it's not just, I mean, you can say that these are just pockets of this radicalism, but at these protests on campus today at Columbia, they are quoting Mao. They are quoting Mao Zedong in their protest and saying, as Mao said, we struggle to dare to fight, struggle to win. These kind of things. It's very, very present there. So again, it's not this one thing where it all happened overnight, or it happened so quickly in a matter of years, but it's more an unfolding, and it's within our institutions, and it's a completely different setting as well. We live in this democratic republic. We live in America, under a Chinese communist regime. It was very different.
Yeah, I mean, if you see, and I've had the pleasure of hearing, teenagers talk about the government, and these kids are radicalized, really radicalized. It's it's pretty scary, and how effective this has been. Not just in colleges, but in the grammar schools and the elementary schools as well.
Yeah.
It's yeah, and of course, you talk in your book about the um, meeting that you were at, the Department of Education meeting, or that subject,
Right.
and you see that same kind of bizarre behavior, this really oppressive, um, thought crime concept that they're going to impose one way or another.
Right.
Um, so you write about the infusion of critical theory. So that's the oppressor versus oppressed narrative, and how that affected the humanities. Groups like the oxymoronic Queers for Palestine on campus. So it's a Fox News parody of academia, what you describe.
Mm.
Could it be that you just gravitated to the most extreme classes like Muslim masculinity, and that otherwise the campus is more normal? Is it
It's
just you were in the humanities?
it's definitely possible. I mean, I did spend a lot of my time in the humanities classroom, so it's reasonable to suggest that there are students that go through that school that don't necessarily, actually, I would say, that don't encounter as much. But so let's say if someone's studying STEM, or if they're in, if they're studying engineering, and they're, the thing about Columbia is, which it actually, it's supposed to be, and it was, and it, I guess, kind of still is, a great thing about Columbia, is that they have their core curriculum, which is that they require all students, no matter their discipline, to take, or no matter their major, to take courses in every discipline in humanities and social sciences. So they're year-long survey courses, contemporary Western civilization, masterpieces of Western literature, and where you're reading and studying the canon and great philosophers. And so these you're encountering this now. yes, so ideally, these places where you're kind of supposed to learn why and how Western liberalism kind of, became what it has and what it's achieved and what we've been able to achieve in the West. And now those spaces, those classrooms are where this kind of stuff occurs a lot. Whether it's because of the radicalized professor, or whether it's because of the students themselves, and the way that they're talking about this. But now, I mean, even in those classes, in those year-long seminars, there's entire lessons and sections on gender and race and decolonization and climate. I mean, like the whole latter half. I mean, there's Franz Fanon and all of these writers that you're reading as I don't know. I mean, is similar in a similar way to studying scripture. And ironically, the classes start with you're reading the Bible, you're reading the Quran, and then you're kind of ending with with Franz Fanon. But yeah, so uh, no matter what you're doing, you're encountering it. And besides that, the culture, the campus is small, and it's present everywhere. I mean, there's protests, there's signs, it's kind of all around. Yes, absolutely, someone could not encounter it or kind of get through and just ignore it, I'm sure. And I was particularly sensitive to it, absolutely. Or I could have been particularly sensitive to it. But this stuff is certainly there, and it's certainly happening, and it's kind of, it touches everyone.
I mean, I can't imagine how you teach, Western civilization or even, any kind of history of science. You would be bombarded with, the horrific white men at every turn. Is the whole course like a disclaimer about how these people have wrongly been given credit for?
Well, I spoke at I spoke at Binghamton University a couple weeks ago. It was a really great experience, and I mean, I was invited there by a conservative student group. And so, these kids were, willing to hear. They weren't there, but there were actually a couple of people there that especially one that really disagreed and spoke up. But we had a really great exchange during and afterwards, so that was awesome. But anyway, they were at one was asking me, like, how, for kind of talking points, like, how can I uh properly argue with someone in class when they're talking about um, you know, sex not being real, or whatever. And these are kids like in biology classes and in science classes, and I'm just like, well, or when they're talking about the West being or even postmodernism, this kind of this approach to knowledge and ideas that everything's relative, and that knowledge is just this construct, and there's really no shared reality, that it is whatever you kind of have conceived it to be. And I was like, well, if you're first of all, you can't really argue with people that are that nuts. But what you can do is kind of question, like, do you think that the scientific method is an effective way to get a little bit closer to the truth? Because what you're doing is, we're talking about the scientific revolution. Like, we're talking about, like, when he's saying, like, they're kind of, they're putting down the Enlightenment and saying the entire Enlightenment project was just a complete crime, and we should just have erased it, and everything that came out of that, it's just nuts. And so it's like, well, what about the scientific revolution, when we're talking about the scientific method specifically, and kind of getting, chipping away, and creating these hypotheses where we're proving something, that something isn't true, or something isn't the way that it is, and getting closer to kind of realizing how something, this objective communal understanding of reality, and what we're all participating in here. Ask them about that. Do they deny the scientific method? Do they deny the reality that is an actual effective way at getting closer to the truth? And they were like, "Oh, that's kind of helpful." So just kind of having those conversations, like, okay, so you can use this jargon and this postmodern language to kind of, try to dance and, go in circles around me as if I'm the crazy one. But, let's talk about that.
You know, yeah, I mean, at least have a a conversation, an allowed conversation about something.
Right.
So as a gay man, who has come to terms with his sexuality, so you're married to a man, um, you were initially on board with the current agenda of the LGBT organizations like GLAAD and HRC, that's Human Rights Campaign, and you even had an internship with GLAAD. And I have to say, I laughed out loud when I read, your enthusiasm for, that was the next thing you were going to work on was trans rights, and
Hmm.
hearing it in your voice, it was just really funny. But what was your mindset going in, and what did you find during that internship at GLAAD?
I was so excited and on fire. Like I was so I when I entered Columbia, and I want to say too, like why it was such a weird experience and totally crazy wacky awakening is because I considered myself and called myself like I would say I was a radical progressive. Like I was there to, I say this a lot, but to hashtag resist the Trump regime. Like I was devastated by Trump's win in 2016. And the only saving grace for me was the fact that I had just gotten into the school. And my plan was to become the most effective activist, left-wing activist that I could. I By going to this place that was kind of the whatever, not ground zero, but really the kind of source of where I could become the most effective activist. And so I was so my first week of classes, January 2017, that's when Trump was inaugurated the first time. He was inaugurated on like my third day at Columbia. And so I was like, just I'm gonna buckle down. Like I'm not just gonna, write angry diatribes on Facebook, and post Huff Post links. I'm gonna like get down to it, and I'm gonna put my head in the books, and I'm just gonna, fight. And so when this opportunity came to work for GLAAD, I it was to be there part of their the fledgling initiative called the Trump Accountability Project, and what it was a news response team to respond to everything that was coming out of the White House regarding LGBT issues. And I was like, this is precisely what I want to do and I'm looking for. Like, yes, 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 yes. And so I was geared up and ready to go. And while I was there, I was like on fire. I am here. I am ready. Like, suit up, show up. This is my mission. This is my righteous cause. It was my calling. But that was really where I started to become super jaded about just the way that this organization seemed to function, their approach to affecting change. I was like, oh, so it's kind of about boycotting and deplatforming and censoring and shame, that kind of stuff. But then besides that, even more than what the organization's tactics seem to be, which I didn't really have so much of an opinion about at the time, was the way that my peers were, just the way that they were talking about sex and gender. And I was like, what are you that was like the biggest it was a total culture shock, and it was like a very very rapid course, in what the new dogma was about gender. So here sitting next to me is this straight girl, young student. She's 20, what, 21, has a boyfriend. She's profoundly just a norm, gender conforming or sex role conforming girl, except for perhaps she's not, shaving her legs anymore and she cut her hair short. But then she's also saying she's trans, but she doesn't take hormones or do any, or isn't even planning to, because you don't have to take hormones to be trans. You don't have to do anything to be trans, she says. And then her pronouns are they, them. And then she's on Grinder, and she's looking for, I don't know what, gay men, I guess. I have no idea why, because she's straight and she has a boyfriend. And then she's saying that she's a bottom. And so I am like just tripping out, because here I am, like having come from a place where I was like working on the marriage equality campaign in Maryland. And I was like, and also just being a normal human fucking being and in my 30s and having a mental acuity to be like, you're nuts, and what the fuck are you talking about? Excuse my French. I'm sorry, everyone, but I was like, this is bananas. And so, um, yeah, that was when I started to see that. Oh, this is, and this person is like representing the organ. I mean, this person's face is on their web. This person's speaking for this organization in certain situations. This is the narrative, and I guess I better get on board with this. And so that was where this I started to really feel this pressure to not misspeak, because it was there that these folks were ready to just kind of jump on you if you, and I joke about that in my book. I mean, I write about it humorously, but it's really what happened. I say like, "Oh, I love Katy Perry. Oh my God, Katy Perry appropriates Black culture, and she is da da." da." I mean, it was just all, and I'm like, "Oh God, okay, forgive me, I apologize." That kind of stuff. So yeah, it was nuts.
So going in, when you talk about it, it sounds like your religious experience. There's this fervor, you're a warrior for, this new God, this new religion. It sounds exactly like it when you speak about it. But
Hundred
but
percent. Yeah.
but what was the moment? Like, was there a moment where you were like, "Oh, wait, no, this is all wrong."
The moment, yeah. There were little moments. It was a collective thing. It was like when there was a call to prayer, like for there was like during my first semester, the Trump had enacted or had announced his Muslim ban that was later challenged in court, and so there was this big move on campus to be vocal against it, and there was a Muslim student group that had, in solidarity with the Muslim population on campus, invited students to participate in afternoon prayer. So they laid out these big blue tarps on the quad, and we all, well, we not everybody, you didn't have to, but I was like, oh well, I'm participating in this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to show my solidarity, and so here I am, like touching my head to my forehead to the ground, like towards Mecca, and and I'm like, wait, what the fuck am I like? What am I doing? Those kind of moments where why I grew up in religious fundamentalism, and that's kind of my project of kind of trying to deprogram from that. And here I am once again, bowing on the ground and participating in a religious, custom with a religion that is in many ways, or in many areas of the world where people practice it, even more behind the times than the modern Christian church. So, what am I doing? These kind of moments of why I don't get it. And also when I would just be in class, because so much of what I was studying was, or whether it was like contemporary Islamic civilization, or like you said, Muslim masculinities, or these courses. I mean, a lot of them were really great courses that I did learn a lot, but a lot of them, like those specifically, were really taught through a critical theory lens. I mean, completely and utterly. So we're reading, these, post-colonial theorists and queer theorists, and like as kind of like this is the way to think about these things and to talk about these things. And it was there that that was where, again, I'm in my 30s, and I do have my frontal lobe is fully, but I have the ability to think critically. And so here I am reading this stuff, and I'm like, this doesn't make a lick of this is insane, this doesn't make any sense. But I wasn't like, oh my God, this is nuts. I was still, of course, like, who am I'm in this Ivy League institution, I'm there to learn, and I want to be. But I did, looking back, I mean, I reading these papers that I would write for these classes, I challenged what I was reading. And I kind of did that because I just knew that's what you're supposed to do as a student. Like, you're supposed to interact with what you're learning, and to like, to wrestle with it, and to, not just regurgitate. But I realized later, like, oh, that's what people are like. People are supposed to just be regurgitating this stuff. Like, we're supposed to just like, I don't know, just kind of second everything that Judith Butler or Joseph Massad is saying. We're not supposed to necessarily talk back at it or challenge the ideas that we're being confronted with. And interestingly, in a lot of cases, like the TAs or the even some professors that I had really loved having me as a student because they read my papers and they were, I guess, maybe a little different from what they were getting from everybody else because I was, challenging what was being talked about and the ways that it was being talked about. So I guess those small moments came internally and then also in my writing, like where I was able to kind of engage privately with my writing. That was like where I was able to do it on the page.
And you weren't getting pushback from
No, not
instructors?
really. I mean, I most of the time, like a lot of times, it was TAs that were grading it, and I really wasn't. I mean, look, I wasn't super, super brave all the time, but like, let's say if there was a paper about, and I write about this in my book, I think, like, there's a paper about, feminism in the Muslim world and in the modern Muslim world and Islam's compatibility with feminism or something like that. And, one of the people that I was reading or had read was Ayan Hirsi Ali, who's, obviously now I know, but didn't at the time, hugely problematic in terms, according to a lot of progressive folks and post-colonial folks, that she is a huge advocate for the West and is an infidel. She's an ex-Muslim. She, all of these things, and so she's a conservative. And she believes in sex-based rights and women's rights, and she advocates and fights for that. And so she has opinions about strong opinions about this that I strongly agreed with or empathized with, was sensitive to, and her perspectives about things, and the criticisms of people in the academy and the university, like even at Columbia, other professors, their responses to her, and their criticisms of her, I challenged them in those papers, and I said, this is short sighted, and not even just short sighted, but the sheer hypocrisy. That was what I couldn't like. It was just the utter and absolute hypocrisy, the double speak, it was just didn't make sense, and I'm like, okay, so how can you blame her, like, if Ayan Hirsi Ali is saying, activating against female genital mutilation, and she is a victim of that, and then you're saying, oh, she's just using her trauma, to paint the entire Muslim world this way, but then in the same time, you want everyone's lived experience and subjective experience to be the dictator of what that reality is. So why does she not get, even though she wasn't doing that? It was just like different rules for everyone. They were constantly shifting and changing, and there wasn't any coherence about any of it.
Um, um, so, you know, really hard to understand when you hear this. So you were in GLAD, you were at Columbia, you're seeing how this is playing out. H- How have organizations like GLAD and HRC, how have and just the movement, the ideology, how has this so successfully captured the Democratic Party? I mean, did you see anything from the inside that made it clear, oh, this is effective because it doesn't sound, it sounds incoherent.
Yeah, I think so. I think that, oh my gosh, I mean, there it's a lot of different reasons. I think. I mean, there are people who think like, oh, it's all about the money or it's all about this or that. First of all, special interest groups like GLAD, HRC, they people pump millions and millions of dollars into them. So they're super super effective because money is does talk. Secondly, the way that these special interest groups are essentially kind of like part and parcel with whatever political party they're with, whether it's TPUSA, the Republican Party, or whether it's GLAD and HRC with the Democratic Party. I mean, they are they influence how these politicians think and talk and speak and act and vote on these issues, and they steer what's acceptable. And so yes, a lot of it doesn't really, it is incoherent and it doesn't make sense, but I think that people don't, and I think you're a lot of people that are involved with Diag are probably like maybe really they might agree with this or might have seen the same thing, but it doesn't become something that you're really necessarily paying so much attention to until it's at your front door. Like everybody's really busy. They have lives. They're like, oh, okay, I guess this is the way to think about things now. Like this is trans rights. Well, hey, I was on board with gay marriage, so yeah, I'm gonna on board with this. But then they start encountering it. So suddenly, like their daughter comes home and she's like, "Hey, I'm a boy now, and I want top surgery." Or when they're at the locker room and suddenly there's a naked man standing there, and they're like, "Wait." Or when Leah Thomas was a big, I think, peaking situation for a lot of people when they saw this man swimming against these female athletes and everybody just you know expecting everyone to just look at this as like, oh, good for her. So but it becomes it's subtle. It just these policies are put in place because these organizations have special liaisons who create these kind of, oh, this is how whether it's bringing gender identity and kind of making that equal to sex in law and policy. People don't understand what the repercussions of this are until a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, 5 years later, and suddenly it just becomes the smaller domino effect where more and more people are starting to wake up and being like, oh wait, I didn't really say I was on board with this. But by then there's also this culture of total fear and censorship. So let's say it's a black lesbian in a gym who gets kicked out of the gym because she objects to a naked man being in the locker room with her, and she's the one that's called out and seen as the bad person, and she's the right winger and the evil whatever. um and by that time it's like, oh God. And so what do? Maybe you're not necessarily like, this is insane. It's insane. But by that time, you've seen what happens to people that do object or that dare to say, I don't think I agree with this. By that time, the culture of fear is established. It's there. It's up and it's running. So you're like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna kind of keep that to myself or whatever. And then again, yeah, if it becomes a personal issue, if it becomes something personal, is when I think one starts to really realize how big of a deal this is.
Yeah, yeah, so you were referring to Tish Hyman,
Right.
who, we plan to talk to soon for an event. That kind of blows up the critical theory structure when you have somebody like Tish come around and who hits all the oppression marks, but then the system doesn't function like it's supposed to because she's not supposed to be doing what she's doing. And so, you have the party that's supposedly following this very righteous path, but then, yeah, it falls apart.
It does, and what sucks is that we could have reasonable voices in the Democratic Party talking about this, right? Like just kind of having the guts to say, yeah, this is, you know, but they stay silent because they're cowards, and then they just completely cede the issue to the right. So then we get what, Trump to be the voice of reason about this shit. It's like, congratulations, you've completely ceded this issue to
Yeah.
the person that you've been hashtag resisting for 10 years now, who sped back to the presidency on these issues. And I mean, not entirely, but it was a part of it, and it was a big part of it. And so, obviously, what they're doing by just being silent and cowardly isn't working. They are ceding it, but I guess, just that's not the way politics work. I mean, it's uh, about sensationalism. If something comes up like the situation with Tish Hyman, or whatever, if it's right, they're like, "Oh, well, what do you have to say about this?" Well, there's ICE raids going on. What do you have to say about that? And I mean, yes, there's hugely contentious issues and a lot going on, whether it's immigration or anything else. But it's just like, okay, flip the table, turn it. It's always, well, what about this kind of whataboutism, and it's like, okay, well, you can just these artful ways to dodge these issues that they're just doing over and over and over again, and it's hugely consequential.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about, you get that, we get that, like, why do you care about this? This is not a big issue. We've got these bigger issues, the economy, and you've got the ice rates and all this. And, you know, I see this as like, this is a door opening for people. People have been dropped into this world because of their kids or because they walk into the gym and there's a naked man there, or any number of, they see what's happening to women in prisons with um,
Right.
males there, and then all of a sudden they're starting to look at what the party is doing, and they're not happy. So maybe it's not the single issue of concern, but it opens a door to examining what the party is standing for, what they're doing, and it extends to all these different places. And people are not happy. They're paying attention in ways that they wouldn't have otherwise. So it's maybe it's not the biggest issue to everybody yet, um, but it's still, it affects how people view the party. So I think they've ceded it to the Republicans,
Mm,
all of these causes. And what do you see from other LGB organizations or the community, if there's like a larger community? Is there Do we have big pushback from those groups? We know obviously we partner a lot with Courage Coalition. There's Gays Against Groomers and all these groups. I mean, what's your sense about what these, how widespread this is within the LGBT community?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I actually get that question a lot, and I don't know what it's different. I mean, yes, I've come across and am able to connect with so many other gays and lesbians who feel and think similarly, or have or feel as passionately, or have spoken up or do speak up or write about it. But I think that's probably just because of like what I've been doing and the writing that I've been doing, or whatever, like guess the line of work I'm in. So um that is certainly the case, but uh I think that sanity is much more, silver lining maybe, like, is much more widespread than it seems. I think that it's like people really do have doubts, or that's weird, but there's this culture of fear, that bolster censorship, but then also what confuses it, I think, this is in my experience, talking with people that have say, okay, yeah, I agree with you, but that's also kind of mean, like, there is a it's weird, like the kind of empathy, this kind of this how empathy overrides reason, like this kind of emotion overrides reason, where it's like, uh-huh, I see what you're saying. Uh-huh. Okay, yeah, chemically castrating. Oh yeah, uh-huh. Taking away a person's reproductive. Oh yeah, uh-huh. Like, oh, women's rights. Yes, women are being raped in prison. Uh-huh. Yeah, totally, totally. But can't you just like at least understand that there are people who feel this way? Like, how can you say that, misgender that or whatever? It's like there's this, and it's like, yeah, I don't want to be cruel, and I don't have any plans to be cruel, and I don't intend to be cruel. It's not about that at all. But it's about like, it's when reality becomes cruel, when reality becomes something that's mean or bigoted, it's like we got a real problem. And so I think that people are so conditioned, especially in the Democratic Party, because identity politics and social justice is so core to that democratic identity. I mean, for me, coming up, I'm 42 years old. I grew up, that was the reason why I was a Democrat. Like, why did I vote for, like, I didn't freaking, you think that when I'm 20 years old, I like really understand, you know, the economy and all of these things. Like, no, I'm trying to get laid and, make money and whatever, keep a roof over my head or whatever the hell. And but yeah, I believe in social justice and a woman's right to choose, and oh my gosh, a black president, and like, all this stuff. I mean, this is so core to what that party purports to represent. and you can see it on the screen. It's like you see a DNC and an RNC, and you're like, oh, that's a lot of white people. Oh my gosh, look at all the colors of the rainbow in that. And that's, I think, a lot of how people approach it. It's just very based in empathy and in a kind of righteousness, in a morality. Obviously, that is not that is on the right as well, but in a totally in a very very different way, in a different form. With Democrats are atheists, but they're more religious than any Republican.
And and when you so in terms of liberals and Democrats, I mean, what's your message to try and bring people back to sanity on this issue?
Well, I guess it's my book. I mean, I honestly, I sometimes I don't feel hopeful. Sometimes I do feel hopeful. My I guess my message is I think that my message is, because there's this culture of fear. I understand. I think we're people who are pushing back, right? I think that a lot of us or them or whoever disagree about the way to go about that. Like, some people are too mean. Some people like should respect pronouns all the time. Some people should, like, people have kind of these hard lines, and then there's like the people who are like, no, just kind of very hardcore in their kind of pushing back and saying like, no, this is and I think that um uh that this emboldening people to speak up and say what they actually think, and just saying is it fun? Is it easy? No, it's actually terrifying. I'm pretty scared all the time, like, to be honest. I am. I'm scared. I'm scared when the book I don't like being hated, and I don't like being seen as a bad person. I don't like when my friends cut me off. I don't like, whatever. I don't like the, nasty misrepresentation of something that I said, and just feeling like, oh my gosh, I want to defend myself, but that'll just make it worse. Like, I don't like that, but just saying things and speaking your mind, I think that that is the most important thing. So arguing about semantics, I don't think is very productive, but I mean, there are discussions to be had about, like, pronouns or that kind of thing. But what I'm saying is, or what I'm trying to say is that I think part of how we got into this mess is by is through politics, and by thinking about the right way to frame things to make it more politically, palatable for a certain demographic or political group. Like, oh, you can't say it like that because then they're going to da 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 da. And but then if you say it like this, and all about like the specific messaging and just kind of the political approach to whether it's speech and journalism and writing, it's like, no, just say what you think or what you mean, and it will embolden other people to do the same thing. I am very, very tired of taking the political activist approach to, how should I phrase this? I mean, people are going to tone police, absolutely, and they're going to accuse you of being mean and this and that, but it's like, okay, so you think I'm evil. I don't know what to say. At least the three other people that read what I just wrote, they're like, they connect with it, and they're like, oh my gosh, I've thought that same thing, or they respond differently. I think maybe people realizing that the most vocal people are the ones that do disagree, the ones that are really appreciative that you're speaking up and that agree and that are becoming emboldened. Unfortunately, that you don't hear from them as much. They're more silent, but they go about their lives and they continue. That's why it's so great. Like, if I write something and people message me and they're like, I want to thank you for writing this, it's like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm not alone, I'm not insane. And this hate messages or whatever that I'm getting from other people, they aren't the majority.
So have you lost friends? Have you do you have like your cousin screaming at you from across the Thanksgiving table?
Not many. I mean, I do have, like, one of my closest friends. Yes, she doesn't. She says, I mean, she hasn't said this to me personally, but she doesn't speak to me anymore, and she's let our mutual friends know that she does not want to speak to me ever again, and isn't going to read my book. She says I'm quote unwell. Um, and
Wow.
but and that's a person that I was best friends with and traveled with and knew for a long time, and but look, I mean, yeah, so that's painful, and I don't like it, but um, you know, it's also really shitty. Like I'm
Yeah.
like I love being having a life where I talk to and relate to people of all different viewpoints. Like people can offend me all you want. I don't care. Like I'm just interested in what your ideas are. Like if you're like, "Oh my gosh, you know what? I actually really do think like that, let's say gay shouldn't be allowed to marry and because da 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 da." I'll be like, "Oh, interesting. Why? Let's talk." It doesn't I'm still here. I'm still a person. It's okay. But that kind of that closed-minded way of living is such a small way of living, of cutting yourself off from people that aren't I mean it's just like being in the cult again. It's a very small way of living and it cuts you off from so much life experience. I like hearing and being challenged by other people's ideas. I used to not be. I used to be like my friend. I really did. But this experience, going into that space, that's why I'm like, God, I wish she could go to Columbia for 4 years. Maybe, I mean, who knows? Maybe she would become even more radicalized. She might, come out of it with a shaved head and a double mastectomy, or maybe she would come out and see like, oh, I kind of understood what Ben was talking about now. Who knows? But yeah,
Yeah. Well, the fact that you won't read your book, that's pretty harsh. But yeah,
yeah.
that's really sad. So we skipped over a pretty dark chapter in your life, and that's when you fell into addiction and you were suffering severe mental illness. So you pulled yourself out of that, thankfully, and you're now obviously functioning and a successful adult. You're married. You're a writer. So how does your own past mental health struggles affect how you understand the cohort of trans-identifying teens and young people that we see?
Oh my goodness. Well, uh, yeah. I mean, that's a loaded question right there. I mean, yeah. I know that yeah, there's that mental health is a huge factor in a lot of people, young people identifying as trans. I know that ASD, that there's a lot of people in the spectrum that are identifying that way, and there are reasons, or hypothetical reasons for that I find, I would agree with. But uh, yeah, I think that um, it was just so different for me. Like it was like I became before this wave. Like if I had lived and had been in like, okay, if I was in middle school and I was coming out of this community and I was shunned from this community, and I am bullied and I'm like, oh, are you a girl or a boy, having my sex questioned all the time and Ben's a fag and this and that. If I had a guidance counselor that pulled me aside and was like, Ben, I see you're being bullied and like this is horrible, and like maybe what's your gender identity, like do you maybe you are a girl and that's okay. I you know I would have lunged at that, being the person that I was, because I would have been like, "Oh, this isn't a moral failing. Like this isn't a moral defect or something evil about me. This is a medical defect that I can fix. Like I can become a straight girl. Like I this will give me permission to behave exactly how I want to behave. I can wear pink and listen to Paul Abdul and whatever and be a fashion designer and say screw football. I don't give a f. And then also I won't be a homosexual and burn in hell for all eternity. Wow, that would be like amazing, especially if like the adults in my life, these kind, the authority figures are saying, if people are being like love bombed or even treated as an exceptional because of being this thing, my god, that would be that would be so great. But also, that's a very individual experience. Certainly, my big concern from the beginning of speaking up about this was thinking about the gender nonconforming kids who are more likely just to grow up to be gay and lesbian and who are set upon this track. But there are so many other kids. I would say perhaps maybe even the majority of kids or young people that are identifying as trans today are not. It's people that either are on this on the spectrum, or they do just have mental health comorbidities, or we're living in this insane time where they're becoming completely radicalized, on their social media channels, and in even in their classrooms, but or through their peers. But there's social cachet. There's all these reasons for identifying that way. But yeah, it was different. I came up in a time when, and this again, this can be perhaps how it is for other people, but like I was struggling. I had a psychotic break. I was in and out of psych wards. I shot heroin. I did all of these. I was in really, really bad shape. And you read my book. And so I didn't have any choice but to get better. Like, because I was just going to die, and I did really come close to dying, and I was very suicidal, and I came very close to taking my own life, and I know that I came very close to being killed many, many times and killing myself, whether it was when I was on the road driving or whatever I was doing. The drugs, massive amount of drugs that I was taking, but I ended up getting help and getting better and getting sober. But now it's not cool to rise above. Like, the narrative is like, to be a victimhood is what's cool. Victimhood, being a survivor, like, no, that's you. It's almost like if you're struggling and you are suffering, keep that going, because all that what that does is that proves that capitalism is evil, and there's no succeeding in it, and that we must overturn it. Like, there is that this way of life, even if you have the opportunity to succeed, don't. Like, even if you have the opportunity to get better, don't. Like, get worse, because what we need to do is we need to prove and reinforce this idea that there's no winning in capitalism for anyone. And in the West, and the way things are now, let's reinforce this idea that this is a dead end and this is a lost cause, and that we need you know to erect a social, burn it all down and erect some kind of communist socialist utopia in its place. I mean, that sounds kind of like, oh wow, like that's probably, and not every single individual is functioning and thinking that way, but that is what underlies what is going on there, whether people realize it or not. That culture of, no, victimhood is cool. It's not cool to be a survivor and to be like, oh, I got better. I mean, then they're just like, oh, you're just like, oh, so you just think I should lift myself up by my bootstraps, and everybody's responsible for theirs. What a right wing idea, you know?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the victimhood and piling on the diagnoses is very popular. And I think about how you were describing the scrupulosity, and you have kids who are told that they're oppressors, and how do they find forgiveness, right? How do they find their way out of that shameful position?
Well, we they don't. I mean, a lot of them, I mean, look, they go to, they find right-wing influencers who are the anecdote, are the, the antidote to that. They say, screw that. You don't have to even participate in that. Like, very similar to the postmodernists and the critical. Though, you don't have to participate in that cis heteronormativity. It's like, for them, they're like, yeah, you don't have to participate in that 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 idea at all. Like, yeah, you can be racist, yeah, white people are better. Yeah, I mean, they're chased into other extremes. Unfortunately, some people are. Other people become depressed. Other people become, uh, I don't know. I mean, people react in different ways. But yeah, I think it definitely makes young people, who are especially young white men. I mean, people in a classroom and you tell them day in and day out that they're the reason why the world is bad, and they're the kind of the source of all the evil in the world, over time they might be like, oh, I'm kind of tired of this. I and where does that lead? Then it's like, well, if you're lying to me about this, what else are you lying to me about? And then suddenly, there can be people that it opens the door to other influences that maybe aren't the best.
Yeah, I think you have the kids that are going that direction and the kids who are more vulnerable to this, who then find redemption in trans.
Oh, for sure. 1,000,000%.
Um, so you were older than most students when you went to Columbia. So you're
Well, and also it's what you can identify into. You can't
yeah,
identify as I can't identify into indigeneity. Like I can't identify as a black person, but I can identify as a woman, or a trans woman or a non-binary person, queer, whatever. It's something you can identify into, and overnight you've you've become an oppressed minority that deserves, you know well, that actually doesn't just deserve special treatment, but that is immune to certain kind of criticisms.
yeah. And I think that it then, if you have somebody who's already struggling with their mental health or has other challenges, then you're driving them into this world where then it does become an obsession and it does become a fixation for these young people.
Hmm.
That's why, certainly for the kids on the spectrum who are prone to that, it it just feeds into um, that issue of fixation and rumination.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, let's talk about Columbia. You were one of the older students when you went, so
Hmm.
you're a millennial. Why have so many members of Gen Z fallen to the Gen? You saw it when you were there, and you talked about that young woman who was suddenly trans with no indicators whatsoever. Not that there's an indicator, but claiming these identities. What is it about this generation?
uh oh, and what's interesting is that individual that I wrote about in the book, as far as I know, I think she did end up uh masculinizing with I mean, because that's kind of where it leads often. If
Yeah.
you go into that, you're eventually going to, you go into a barbershop, you're going to get a haircut. As far as I know, I think that she has medicalized, with testosterone and even undergone surgeries, but that's besides the point. What was your question? You were
Right.
saying.
Just, what is it about that generation that you saw at Columbia,
Mhm.
that the Gen Z generation? What makes them so vulnerable to this movement?
I think I don't. I mean, I think it can be a lot of things. I think it is. I think social media is a big. I mean, it's hugely influential. Social media is just such a rapid fire way to to spread a dogma, to spread a to evangelize, to proselytize. I mean, it was Tumblr. I mean, it's just so effective. Like, you think about back at the beginning of the printing press and how consequential that was, and how much it changed the face of news gathering and information gathering and opinion making and everything. And it's like with this, it's like on steroids. It's just, and young people just being hugely, being really tech savvy and knowing, growing up with that and understanding how to navigate it and work it. And it just becomes a second nature. It becomes just another part of their world, or the main part of their world in some cases. And so, um, that is, it's like having catechisms every day, all day, in your pocket on your phone, just looking at your screen and seeing like how you're supposed to think about things, how you're supposed to react to things, what you're supposed to say, what the cool way is. I mean, people are even, on having making videos of reactions. I mean, reaction videos too. Da 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 da. I mean, they're like, oh, how do I be human? This is how I behave. It's like they're kind of taking their cues from that. That's part of it. Another part of it, I think, too, is that as we just have become more of a secular society, where people have fallen away from religion, and Gen Z, their parents are Gen X. I mean, a lot of folks who were, famously or not, kind of generations that really fell away from religion and practicing. There is, in some respects, in people, this kind of what you could call a God-shaped hole or a purpose-shaped hole. This kind of search for meaning, and if they're not going to get it at Sunday school, then they're going to find a way to feel good, to feel righteous, to feel moral, in some cause. So yeah, they're not going to church on the weekends, but they are participating in a strike for climate change, and they're not fasting as part of their religious group. They're fasting on the college campus as a strike against, I don't know, whatever it is. I mean, I saw people fasting. I don't know. People fasted a lot. Like, and that was the same thing in the Lamb of God. You were always like fasting because it brought you closer to God. It cleared your mind more. And so it's just it's a religious exercise. It can be a way to find meaning. And I think that Gen Z is just especially vulnerable to that for those reasons, and perhaps more. But I think that's two of them.
So in a way, it's also, this search for meaning in the same.
Yes. I think,
Um,
yeah.
so there obviously, there was no gay straight alliance or GSA in the Lamb of God. Um, but can and we're really wary about those groups now because they're pushing a lot of the
Well, they're not even called Gay Straight Alliance anymore. They're
right.
called Gender Sexuality Alliance, right?
Was sneaky little shift
Right.
that parents understand. Um, can you see a version of those groups that would be positive at this point? W- or is it doomed because of
I don't know. I feel like we just have to completely rethink the way that we're addressing this stuff. I mean, look, like I was talking on a Quillette podcast last weekend with John Kay, and like the gay rights movement, I mean, people, this isn't necessarily like something that's entirely new. Like, okay, so this like kind of like when we talk about this like militant activism, like this isn't necessarily new. I mean, it's not like there wasn't, dogmatic activists, militant activists, censorship, and oh, you're thinking about this wrong, and all of this kind of stuff before. Now it's just, you know maybe because of social media, because there's a lot of different reasons why it is the way that it is. But um I don't think that this is necessarily new. And what was your question? I lost my train of thought.
just, is there a version of that that would work
Oh,
now?
I was gonna, yeah, so I think that we need to like rethink. Okay, so I when I got into wanting to be an activist, I was like, I want to help create a world where, so I write this in my book. Like, so much of activism is like a vendetta, a personal vendetta against the past. I'm sorry, but it is. Like, people who become active, they have personal stuff that you don't, not everybody just becomes passionate about an issue and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go. It's like, it's because it's for a reason, especially when it's identity based and identity driven, right? So, like, for me, I had this experience of growing up in religious fundamentalism, being told how awful gay was, and having that kind of encoded into my bones from the very beginning, and suffering a lot of trauma because of that. And then being hugely bullied for my gender nonconformity, and being like, I want to create a world where kids who are those inherently gender nonconforming minority, where they are not bullied like I was, where they're protected, where they're nurtured, and they're just told like, hey, it's okay to be different in the way that you are. And yes, and creating a space for them. So what happened was, I think, uh in terms of the way that we went about that, was we like went even further. We're like, this is actually the right way to be. Like, every kid is queer. Like, every boy is, all boys can be really girly, all girls, and sex is meaningless. Like, biological determinants are meaningless. Like, sex differences are just hogwash. Like, and it's kind of the part of the reason why we're in this mess. And it's like, no, actually, so rethinking, instead of being like to the gay kid like, oh my gosh, you're the best and everyone should be like you, like the queer kid or whatever, and you're special. It's like, yeah, you're different and that's okay. And you know what? There is such thing as a norm. You know, there is such thing. You are abnormal. There is such thing as you are atypical, and that's perfectly okay. Because most boys are going to behave in certain ways. Most girls are going to behave in certain ways, and they're going to have a lot of things in common. And there's going to be and there always will be a minority of inherently sexual nonconforming boys and inherently sexual nonconforming girls. What do we do about that? How do we make space for them in society? How do we? And yes, is there going to be bullying? Is there going to? Of course, because of the way that humans are, we seek community and for survival, we edge out the weird one, the odd one. You know, we conform. All of these things, but creating more space and a society where there's just that where people are freer to grow up and be who they are, and not feel forced to change, whether it was like in my case where I had to defeminize myself, and make it this conscious effort to cut my hair and deepen my voice and walk differently and wear different clothes, or whether it's to stunt puberty and try to medically engineer them to pass as the opposite sex because they're super girly. But um just kind of rethinking this and being like keeping kids and young people and everyone grounded in reality and truth, even when that truth is harsh, because truth and reality is harsh. you know it's not saying like, oh, you're not different at all, sweetie, you're not abnormal. Actually, yeah, you are different, and I know right now it probably sucks because it feels like you're the only one, but trust me, you are not the only one. And your life's gonna be fucking awesome if, like, once you find people that are like you, and and I say that because too, I've written about this before in the past, but like being yourself and not being obsessed with having to express yourself differently than what you are, who you are, it's very consequential to like your expression in other ways, like your creative expression and your into like for me, I was a really creative kid, right? And I was a really athletic kid as well. I was just a bright kid. And then when I became so consumed with, if just as a survival mechanism, like constantly self-scanning for these signs of femininity and stuff like that, it was hugely like it just atrophied me in so many ways. Like I wasn't as bold and as bright. I didn't want to be on stage, and I wasn't as creative, and I wasn't as like, it just stunted me in a lot of ways. And I think that if we create space for people just to be who they are and figure out what the hell to do with, and to make space for, and to not be so freaking petrified of boys that are really sissy and girls that are really butch, and not have everyone freak the f out about it, then maybe those folks can grow up to be like really awesome and just to have great lives, but constantly and truly grounded in reality. Like, yeah, you're not normal, and yeah, most boys are going to be like this, and yeah, your body is male, and yes, your body is female, and that's reality forever. And so what do we do?
Yeah, I remember the campaign that was like, "It gets better,"
Hmm.
for this was for gay kids when I was
Yeah.
18, and, that was the message. It gets better. And now that has been co-opted, and also, about being your authentic self, that you're fine just the way you are. It's actually now because 'cause you're really a girl. If you're a boy, fine that you're really like, all of those messages are have been co-opted, and they don't work anymore because now they've been now being your true self is being somebody completely different.
Yes.
So, uh, let's take some questions from the audience. What was it like to be in that room with Maud Marin and Lisa Southern Davis and Corey Cohn at that school meeting in New York?
It was terrifying as such. I mean, it was just hugely, it was very, very uncomfortable. I mean, I did it, I handled it, it was fine. But I was scared. I don't like people screaming at each other. I don't like that kind of conflict. I would much rather, just write and get my ideas out there that way. I don't want to, try to convince a room of people that are glaring at me, that, perhaps, the way that people are talking about gender in schools isn't necessarily working, especially when they're the true believers. It wasn't fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I watched that. You talk about it at the end of your book, but, it's if you haven't seen that video, it's pretty shocking. We'll put the link to it, after the space for people to watch. Um, Kevin, you wanna go ahead and ask your question? You're on mute, so unmute. There you go.
All right, hi, can you hear
Yep.
me? Um, all right, hey Ben. This has been interesting. I just wanted to ask you, with your experience now writing a book and the writing that you've done previously, and obviously these interviews, have you found that there are any professors or anyone in the academic field that are coming to you behind the scenes in any sort of allyship, or are you feeling alone in that? Or I'm just wondering, like, what kind of support you're getting from people that are experiencing the same kind of fear that you talk about.
Yeah, I actually have gotten that from like the beginning. Like when I first started writing about these issues, I wrote the piece in Quillette, like a long essay back in like 2021, which kind of became like the basis for the book. Um, uh, I kind of talked about some of these issues, and even back then, people in academia were absolutely contacting me and saying, "Oh, thank you for yeah." So I've had people in academia contacting me from the beginning, saying I encounter this, or wanting to talk to me or sharing their own experiences, for sure. If I were in academia still, might be a different situation, like in terms of what that would be like. But I'm no longer in academia, so it's just people, writing me emails or sending me messages and saying like, "Oh, it actually happens often, a lot."
Great, thank you. Kevin, anybody else have a question for Ben? No, quiet. Um, well, this has been great speaking with you. Ben Appel's new book is called Cis White Gay: The Making of a Gender Heretic. Read it. It's great. Great Christmas gift for your uh, gender confused nephew. Um, Ben Appel, thank you. And thank you to the audience. Please remember to check out our website, diag.org. That's di-ag.org. Follow us on X, on Instagram, Facebook, and on Substack, where we have an amazing new article in response to James Marcus's very long New Yorker piece. So please check that out. Um, Thank you all for joining us. Have a
Thanks so
good
much.
evening. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Have a great night.
You too. Bye bye.